We all know that lasers, depending on several variables, have the ability to damage the eye. We're very fortunate to have with us this morning Dr. Quay Snyder, who serves as the President and CEO and co-founder of Aviation Medicine Advisory Services and is ALPA's Aeromedical advisor. We've asked Dr. Snyder to comment on the aeromedical aspects of this issue and discuss his experience in treating pilots who have suffered the effects of lasers. Dr. Snyder.
Thank you very much, Captain Cassidy. Appreciate it. Appreciate the opportunity to speak here in front of people who are so dedicated to aviation safety, aviation professionals and medical professionals, industry professionals alike. What I'd like to do today is talk about the hazards associated with lasers. First, a little primer on the anatomy and physiology of vision. Next, the factors in laser hazards, which Mr. Murphy has already spoken about, so I'll skip through that in the interest of time. The laser effects and injuries that are there and resources available for all of us. For eye anatomy, the eye has 4 critical parts in association with laser injuries. The cornea is the clear exterior of the eye. The pupil is the aperture that adjusts the amount of ambient light that's coming in. The lens behind the pupil focuses the ambient light on the retina, and the retina is the nerve cells that are responsible for actually sending those signals to the brain. Anatomically, it looks like this. The cornea in front, this is where LASIK surgery is done. The pupil, the dark spot, the lens, which serves just like a camera lens, and on the rear side, the retina. The retina consists of a series of nerves and vessels that are really light receptors. They fall into 2 broad categories. One of the cones, and those are in the macula, the central portion of the vision. That's responsible for your best visual acuity, the 20/20 or better vision. And that also perceives light. In the periphery of the retina are the rods. The rods do not have good visual acuity. Best visual acuity associated with the rods may be as little as 2200. However, they're very good at night vision and also detecting motion. And the optic nerve is the confluence of all of these nerves from the retina coming back to a central portion, also where the blood vessels go out to supply the retina, but the optic nerve runs back into the brain. So the retina really is just an extension of the brain. The light perceives visible light in a spectrum, with the shorter wavelengths being blue and the longer wavelengths being red, with other colors in between. And looking at the macula, the central portion of the eye, it has the blue, red, and green cones that perceive the light and translate this into the entire spectrum of colors that we appreciate. This is a view of the retina. If a physician were to look in the back of your eye, the central portion, that is the deep red, is where the concentration of cones are. It's a very, very small size, about the size of the head of a pin, but that's responsible for your vision, that 20/20 vision. The rest of the eye, as you get away from the central portion, makes up more and more of the rods. You can also see the blood vessels that are supplying the nerves there, because the retina is a high utilization area for oxygen, and so it needs a rich supply of blood vessels. But you also notice that the blood vessels don't concentrate on the macula. They're in the peripheral vision. And on the far left, you see the optic nerve, where the blood vessels are coming out of and the nerves are running back into the brain. So this is the working area of the eye, which is so important when we're considering both vision and lasers. As far as the physiology, the brain perceives the visible light, but the eye is exposed to a full spectrum of light, from the infrared or the longer wavelengths through the visible and to the shorter wavelengths of ultraviolet. The eye has different sensitivities to different colors, as Mr. Murphy demonstrated, much more sensitive to green than it is to red. But the retina can be damaged by light that is not seen. It's in the IR spectrum with the heat. I'll talk about that in a second. The UV spectrum, a lot of the energy in the UV spectrum is absorbed in the fluids in front of the eye, the iris itself, the lens, the cornea, and the vitreous and vitreous humor. The visible light is in the spectrum of approximately 400 to 760 nanometers, and that impacts the retina. The near infrared spectrum is a little bit longer wavelengths in the 760 to 1400 nanometers, but that is also absorbed by the retina. And here's a visual representation of the same thing. You can see that the UV light is absorbed prior to it being hit by the retina. But the retina gets not only the visible light, but also the infrared. And there's different sensitivities to wavelength. As you saw Mr. Murphy put up the red light and the green light. The green light of equal power appears much brighter to the eye than the red light would. This is a demonstration of it. The gray band on the right-hand side shows the spectrum of red light from the mid-600s to the higher 600 nanometer wavelength. And the scale, the vertical scale, is a logarithmic scale, not an arithmetic. So each one increases by a factor of 10 when you go up. So the green light near the 530, most of the green lasers you see are 532 nanometers length, is perceived by a factor of about 35 times more than red light, depending on where you are in the spectrum. As far as physiology, in dark conditions, what we have is the pupils dilating. So you're attempting to bring in more light that's available. You switch to use of the rods, and it's not a 100% switch. The rods dominate in low light conditions, and that's why you can perceive the light, but your visual acuity is not as much. So you're using that non-macular vision, the one more on the periphery. You have substantially reduced visual acuity in night, but you also have increased sensitivity to bright light because your eyes are adapted to that. And red light will actually enhance night adaptation because the rods are not really sensitive to red light. That's why in dark rooms they'll have red light there, or in the old days when we were going out to fly night missions, we would wear the red goggles before we were doing it, when we were doing the briefings, so we could adapt to the night. This is a visual representation of it. The low lighter green curve on the right-hand side shows photopic vision or daytime vision. And you can see that the spectrum of light that the eye is sensitive to runs from the high 600s, which is in the red spectrum, down to the lower in the mid 400s, which is on the blue end of the spectrum. But with night adaptation, you can see that the vision is most sensitive around the low 500s, which is where the green light with the green lasers are. And if you look at the right tail end of that diagram, you'll notice that at night vision, you have almost no sensitivity to the red light, which is again why we adapt to red light there. So this pilot is experiencing all three types. Presumably night adapted. This is actually the FAA simulator off that video. But night adapted, so it's using some scotopic vision, getting the bright green light, which would be photopic vision, the daytime thing, and then looking at the instrument panel is what we call mesopic vision, where you do have some light in a rather darkened background. So it's using all three types, and in this situation, exposed to the entire spectrum. There are some very good uses of lasers on the eye to treat diabetic retinopathy, a proliferation of blood vessels that causes blindness, leading cause of adult blindness in the United States, glaucoma, another leading cause. We use it for LASIK. The cornea, which focuses the eye, focuses the light onto the retina, or a major part of it along with the lens, can be changed in shape to change that focus. And there are other causes of laser or other uses of lasers in medicine. This is a picture of diabetic retinopathy. This is, as I said, when diabetics have problems with the blood of the blood vessels rupturing and going out into the retina, causing blind spots. And each of those white dots you see are laser burns, intentional laser burns on the back of the retina using the heat of the laser to stop blood vessels, essentially a spot weld on those blood vessels from leaking out so the person doesn't get blindness. And if you think back to the earlier photo that I had, you can see the optic nerve where the blood vessels are coming out. And then you see the macula to the right. You see the little hemorrhages in there, but the laser is not going after the macula because that's where your best visual acuity is. So in this situation, lasers have been used appropriately to prevent a loss of vision, but you can see that that is concentrated out on the periphery rather than where the central vision is. So what presents hazards for vision from lasers? Well, the characteristics, the way the laser is used, external factors, and protective measures. Mr. Murphy covered quite a bit of this already, so I may go through it rather quickly. The output, the color of the light, the divergence, and whether it's a pulse or continuous laser. And primarily, we're talking about continuous power lasers here. The FDA characterizes the lasers in multiple categories, from the lower power ones used in CD players to slightly higher power, the scanners in the supermarkets, the laser pointers, higher powered ones now available. That's a targeting laser used in the Air Force, and then the ultimate laser, the Air Force's Airborne 747 that can supposedly shoot missiles out of the sky. It's a little more power than what we're talking about today. Another factor in the hazards of lasers is how it's used, whether it's direct or indirect illumination, whether you're getting reflections, whether it's used in the daytime or nighttime. Again, the nighttime eye is adapted. It has a very wide aperture in the pupil, so it's receiving more light. You're adapted to that. Distance is the primary factor. And then the phase of flight also presents different risk depending on when you're exposed. The injury potential is really determined by the energy per unit area, and that is all a factor of the pupil size and focus. The eye between the cornea and the lens can focus up to 100,000 times the energy of the ambient light on a single point in the retina. The injury potential is also mitigated by a blink reflex and turning away from it so that there's not a direct visualization of the light onto the macula. External factors that also will mitigate some potential injuries to the weather and environmental. If there's a lot of dust in the air, there's a lot of rain, moisture, the laser light is diffused more than it normally would be. The type of aircraft operations, and we'll hear from some police officers today, the helicopter operations, which are low and slow with a large canopy, and canopy essentially on the floor out in front of the rudder pedals, would also present a larger target that the laser light could be diffused against. Amplifying and diminishing devices. If you happen to catch a laser while you are looking through a binocular, you've just increased the size of your pupil quite a bit by capturing all that light and focusing on it. And then awareness of the hazards and training to avoid it. The military is using this quite a bit right now, and I believe it's very appropriate to do so in the civilian environment to reduce the relative risk from laser injuries. So the high-risk environment is a slow-moving aircraft, close to the ground, with a predictable flight path. Think of a helicopter hovering. The large canopy or windscreen area would also present an increased hazard. Nighttime, with the adaptation of the pilot's eyes to that, flying in VFR, so you tend to be heads up or heads outside the cockpit. And certainly if someone is intentionally targeted as opposed to the flashing light and the ability to hold the laser on the target. What are some of the protective measures that we can do? Well, first of all, crew training and reaction. ALPA in the March 2011 magazine, which is reproduced in the handouts you have, has absolutely superb guidance for pilots in there. The Air Force and the FAA have produced a joint video. The Air Force has training programs that serve to reduce the hazards for pilots. I have put in there that filters don't seem to be practical for civilian operations. I leave my mind open to our sponsors up there to convince me that there may be some practical applications for that. Glare shields and light blockers reduce the intensity of the light coming in, or even getting a hand up or getting a chart up in front of you to reduce the light exposure. But I think the biggest issues we need to tackle are public education, which this is emphasizing, and we need to pursue legislation and enforcement. I like Mr. Murphy's idea of the tax, too. I think that hits people where it counts. Some of the terms that are used as far as injuries are the nominal ocular hazard distance, which is the maximum possible distance that you could suffer an injury to the eye from a laser. And it makes some assumptions that err on the side of safety. It assumes a blink would take place in 1/4 of a second, where the actual blink really is just under 1/10 of a second. It assumes a fully dilated pupil at 7 millimeters, where a daytime pupil may be down to 2 millimeters in size. And this predicts what's called the maximal permissible exposure, which really is a 50% probability that an injury might occur if the person was exposed to that power at that distance. That doesn't mean 1 foot short of that an injury is going to happen, and 1 foot beyond that an injury is not going to happen. It really is a spectrum of possibilities. And again, this errs on the most conservative estimates. So let's talk about laser effects in eye injuries. In this case, here's a targeting laser. I think the lead behind the laser is going to be more hazardous than the laser itself, but it remains to be seen. I characterize these as laser effects and laser eye injuries. Effects would be temporary and self-resolving. They usually don't require treatment or evaluation, but they still can compromise safety, and I think that's the gist of what we're talking about today. Laser eye injuries can be temporary, but might require treatment. They can be permanent, but be of little clinical significance because they haven't impacted the macula, or they may be permanent and cause significant disability. What are the temporary effects? We've already talked about this, the distraction, which is just diverted attention. The story about flying at 35,000 feet and seeing something over Las Vegas, an example of that. The glare is just a dazzling sensation with discomfort, which interferes with optimum vision, both outside and potentially inside the cockpit. An after image comes from a stronger power where there's a transient image left in the visual field even after that is gone. And with a flash blindness, the most extreme form of a temporary effect, there is a loss of ability to see for a short period of time afterwards, albeit that short period of time could be at a very critical phase of flight. And Mr. Murphy already showed this from the FAA study where they shined lasers at people in simulators, no laser exposure. This is 5 microwatts per centimeter power. This was, 0.5. This is the 5 one with the glare and the flash blindness caused by higher power. So what are the risks of laser effects? Again, laser effects would be the transient. The highest risk is in the critical phases of flight, unable approach and landing, unable to complete that safely, unable to see the instruments, and difficulty with the taxiing. From personal health, the Air Force has found out about this. The biggest temporary hazard are the psychologic effects. The fear that they will be lased again or not be able to do it. Interestingly, it was psychologic rather than physiologic, which was the biggest hazard, and the Air Force is attacking that directly. The temporary effects could be pain, burning, light sensitivity, a slowed pupillary response, or accommodative spasm so you can't focus. And then, as I said, the psychologic fear. And when we get calls in our office, the pilot fears for vision, safety, their income, and is their career over? The permanent effects are really retinal damage, and that's burns, hemorrhage, holes in the retina, corneal clouding, or lens opacities. Catch me afterwards, and I'll talk with you about some stories about lens opacities, such as this. This happens to be a cataract rather than a laser burn, but the effect is the same. And also, you see a fully dilated pupil. The retinal damage can be total destruction. That spot weld, like we saw in the picture of the diabetic retinopathy, may result in a permanent blind spot. You might not notice that blind spot if it's off in the periphery because you have overlapping visual fields from 2 eyes. But if it's in the macula or it's larger, you may certainly notice that. This is a picture of an Air Force experimentation on an animal where they actually lased the macula right there, and you can see the retinal hemorrhage with the bleeding. What's our experience? Well, not everyone calls our office. Obviously, it's only those people who experience injuries. We have 37 incidents in the last 5 years. Surveying, they're all almost green lasers. Most were complaining of after images and sensitivities, and most of those resolved within 24 hours. We had 5 cases that went more than 1 day. And we had one pilot who still remains disabled with a macular burn with reduced visual acuity. Laser effects and injuries. The permanent injuries are very unlikely to occur with the current power lasers that we have right now. The temporary effects, I think, are the significant safety hazard. They're growing. They pose an immediate safety effect with the glare, the distraction, the flash blindness, and the after images. And it's a result of the higher power lasers that are available right now. This is reproduced in your handouts that you have from the ALPA magazine, and laserpointersafety.com talks about the hazards. It's difficult to read, but this chart shows that as the power increases, the potential for injury increases, as Mr. Murphy said, by the square root of the distance that of the power that you're looking at. So you can see that the distraction factor with a half-watt laser can get out to 22 miles, although the injury, maximum potential injury, is really only at about 500 feet. Mr. Murphy used wicked lasers. These are some of the lasers that are available. I think you had the spider laser up there. Wicked lasers is a double-edged sword. They have the powerful lasers, and they also put warnings on their lasers that don't use them in that way. So going on their site, they had the torch with a 100-watt laser. It advertises melting plastic, burns paper, lights matches, lights cigarettes, and scrambles eggs. And you can see that they have videos on their website of it doing all of that. But again, it's held very close. And it's available for $150. Okay. Protection. I don't think laser eye protection is right now for our pilots. I think the pilot behaviors and actions and education are the most important things. Recommendations. It's in the back of your book. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip through this. Important things. Don't rub your eyes, and get the reports in. And get an exam. Get an exam, there are 3 important things: the history of the event, checking the visual acuity, and making sure the Amsler grid is appropriate. And so with that, the visual acuity is checked, and if you can read 20/20, more than likely you're not going to have any problem. If the Amsler grid looks like the top portion, there's no distortion or warping of the retina, you'll be in good shape. If you start to see metamorphosis of the shapes, then you potentially have problems, although they may resolve. The resources, the ALPA resources are available for you there. In the handouts, ICAO has a good brochure. The FAA has one. The FAA has a series of technical reports by Ben Nakagawara and Robin Montgomery. The advisory circular and the Transport Canada Aeronautical Information Circular are also in your handout. Some things from the Air Force. Laserpointersafety.com, Mr. Murphy's site, and the video is linked there as well. And additional resources in technical books. And I don't think we're at this point yet. I'm over my time, so hopefully Mr. Murphy won't use that 1-watt laser and blow my head off right here. And I'll be available to answer questions either outside, or if Tina says I have 2 or 3 minutes, I'd be happy to do that. Do I have 2 or 3 minutes, Tina? No.
I'll handle that in 1 second.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.